call the April 12th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting to order at 6:02 p.m. That was weak. Ms. Pinyard, will you call roll, please?
Olive Gallagher. Here. Ron Heberlein.
Here.
Cameron Mesbah. Catherine Neal.
Here.
Jennifer Willard.
Here.
Nicole Hendricks.
Here.
Andrew Carr.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, citizens input. This is the time that citizens have the opportunity to address the Planning Commission regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing tonight. Therefore, if any member of the audience, either here in City Hall or via Zoom, would like to speak about any work session item or any other matter of concern, please raise your hand or send a message to the recorder using the Zoom chat function so that we may hear from you now.
I have no one on Zoom raising their hand.
And I don't see anyone in person. All right, moving on to administrative matters, consideration of the March 8th, 2023 Planning Commission minutes. All right, the March 8th, 2023 minutes being considered were previously distributed. Are there any corrections to the minutes? All right, hearing no corrections, the minutes are approved as distributed. All right, next up, looks like we got the first work session for Transit Master Plan.
Hello, good evening. I am Kelsey Lewis. I'm the Grants and Programs Manager here at the City of Wilsonville SMART. And I'm happy to be here tonight. Very, very excited to come to you and talk about our draft Transit Master Plan tonight. I have with me some folks who are on Zoom. And there they are. I'm just gonna pull up. I have two consultant presenters. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull up my PowerPoint. All right. So we are here tonight to talk again about the draft Transit Master Plan. I'll just introduce my team a little bit, then we'll talk about the progress that we've made so far on this timeline for the project, go over the priorities, what we heard from public engagement in the last year, essentially, and then go over with you highlights of the draft master plan that is out now for public comment. And then, of course, the part we're interested in here is to hear comments from you, the commission, and just talk through different pieces of the plan, and then talk about next steps. So this is our third time coming to talk about the transit master plan. So the three of us have been here before, but just to introduce the team, again, I'm Kelsey Lewis here on staff at SMART, and I have with me Michelle Poirot, who's the project manager from Jarrett Walker and Associates, and Brenda Martin from Enviro Issues, who led the public involvement. And the next slide, I'm going to have Brenda go ahead and take the next few slides.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelsey. Hi, everyone. Kelsey, I do believe Michelle might be needed to be let in as a panelist. While I present, maybe we can get Michelle in and we'll buy a little time. So like I said, my name is Brenda Martin. I am a project manager at Enviro Issues and have been working on this project for a year now with Kelsey and Michelle. Hi, Michelle. Welcome. This project has been going on nearly a year. We started off with our existing conditions report and research that Jarrett Walker led, and then my team led the first phase of community engagement during the summer of 2022. Since then, that was the last time we spoke to you, and since then, Jarrett Smart Walker has been working with SMART to develop the service enhancements as well as operational and capital needs, which is what you'll hear from Michelle today. And then we are currently here in spring 2023. We are doing our second phase of community engagement. There's currently a survey available for citizens of Wilsonville and any transit users to look at the draft transit master plan and what is being offered to them as new transit service, and able to provide any feedback that they have to see if, they feel like we heard them from outreach in the fall. Next slide. So I wanted to recap a little bit about what we did in the fall of in the summer of 2022. We had a project website on the Let's Talk Wilsonville site that had information about the previous TMP and also had our community survey. We got over 200 respondents during our survey that was open for about a month. After that, we also did some operator surveys and got to hear from operators what was working well and what wasn't. We did 8 in-person tabling events during the summer at different events around the city. And lastly, we did a stakeholder workshop. That workshop was attended by 18 participants. They were able to play a transit planning game, as you can see here in the photo. We had them kind of plan transit routes with limited resources, knowing that you can only run so many, frequent routes and so many long kind of outer ring routes to cities outside of Wilsonville. And then at this event, we also had some live polling. So we got to ask them questions after the game so we could understand a little bit more about which priorities ended up kind of coming to the top as they went ahead and played the game. Next slide. So the top priorities that we heard from all of those events, the 200 surveys, the 8 tabling events, and the stakeholder workshop, was that people really want y'all to add more weekend service, especially on Sundays. So we heard that loud and clear. They're also interested in more early and late evening service on Smart Service. They want better regional connections. There was a list of different cities and regions they wanted to go to, and there was a huge interest in really leaving Wilsonville and having better connections to surrounding neighborhood towns. And then, of course, maintaining that coverage. So people do like that currently there's really good coverage around Wilsonville, and they want to continue to maintain that while potentially, if possible, adding more service kind of with that regional look in mind. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to share some of the highlights with the draft master plan.
Great. Thank you, Brenda and Kelsey. Can you hear me? Am I hearable? Yes. Okay. I don't want to waste time on IT adventures, but would it be possible for me to share these very same slides from my computer? Kelsey, do you know if that's an option?
Yep, I think so.
Okay, let me try that then. And do you see the top priorities from public input slide? Yes. Excellent. Okay, so thanks, Brenda, for the summary. So the public input that Brenda described had a big influence on the recommendations of the TMP. Some of the recommendations are certainly maintaining momentum that was established in the last TMP and the TMP before it, but some of them are also kind of like turning a little bit towards more recent issues, more recent challenges, and the things that the public told us were so important. So just quick summary of highlights of the draft transit master plan. More frequency, better frequency on routes within town, better frequency on routes going to other cities. Better regional connections. So big priority that came out in multiple ways was people wanting to travel beyond Wilsonville, whether that's for work or for school or to reach social services or to visit people, really wanting to be able to make those longer trips without having a car. new connection points, so that is relevant to regional connections, but also new connection points within town. That is something that kind of arose from the planning work we did, is discovering that actually you're eventually going to need a way for people to make a nice civilized connection between buses, not only at your current transit center. A regional customer service center, this is both to support the additional regional service, but also to continue momentum that you already have in developing a more regional network with your neighbors. Improved weekend service, like Brenda said, there's a huge investment and increase in weekend service in this plan. And also additional dial-a-ride capacity and hours. And some of that is to comply with requirements and provide the complementary paratransit service that you need to provide to support fixed route, but it's also just to keep up with demand. As the population grows and as the population ages, you should expect that there will be some more demand for your dial-a-ride, even at the times when you already provide it. And finally, low and no emissions buses. And again, this is just maintaining momentum that you have already established in using non-fossil fuel buses or non-diesel buses, whether that's CNG or battery electric. And so we have some recommendations related to that. I want to show you a map of the proposed 2028 network, and this is the local view of fixed routes. I have it zoomed in a little bit on the left and then the citywide view on the right. And really important thing to know about this map is that the colors stand for frequency. That's why some of the routes are the same colors as each other. The dark blue lines are service coming every 30 minutes, and that's all day on weekdays. This is not just rush hour frequencies, this is all daytime frequencies. The light blue lines are service coming every hour, and then the other colors mean less frequent service. And then I also want to show you, and I'm happy to go back to this map and talk more specifically route by route if you'd like, but I don't want to get into that level of detail unless it's actually what you want out of this presentation. But I will just point out each route one at a time. So Route A, proposed Route A, and by the way, we used letters so that we don't have to talk about the current 2X, the future 2X. So it's very clear whether we're talking about something that exists or the future. Proposed future Route A would essentially be an upgrade to your existing Route 1X between Wilsonville and Salem. But it would add more frequency more consistently throughout the week. So not just a commuter service for people going at rush hours, but something people can use all week long. Route B, you could think of this as like a more service and an upgrade on your 2X, or you could think of this as an all-day version of WES using a bus. But this would be a all-day, all-week connection among Wilsonville, local service in Wilsonville, and then getting on the freeway going to Tualatin and then going to Tigard. So this would bring all of the connections that are possible, especially in Tigard, within reach of Wilsonville, because that's how people would get to Beaverton or Hillsborough. Also, in smaller numbers, they'd get to Yamhill County that way. There's connections to Sherwood available in Tualatin and Tigard. And this would be every 30 minutes, all day long, weekday through Saturday, and hourly on Sunday. You would have to have discussions with TriMet about this because you'd be running in their service territory. What we've shown on the map is that you wouldn't make every local TriMet stop when you're in Tigard and Tualatin. You'd be making more widely spaced stops so that what you're providing is really a service for traveling between the two agencies' service areas, not within the TriMet service area. Route C, you already run this route. It's very well designed, but essentially we are proposing to improve it by adding more frequency. So more consistent all-day frequency, and then also more consistent Saturday service as well. Route D, this would be a real heavy lifter of a route, meaning we expect you get a lot of demand for this service. It also would take many buses to operate this route, so it's quite a big investment. It would serve Wilsonville Road and then head north on Stafford Road to Legacy Meridian Hospital, and then serve two different stops in West Lynn, Oregon City, where many connections are available to other destinations in Oregon City, including Clackamas Community College, and then on to Clackamas Town Center, Clackamas Transit Center, where all of East Portland is reachable from there, and in the future perhaps also Sandy. So lots of different kinds of trips that people are making could be made on this route. And it's very long, but parts of it should be quite fast because this is the route that would get to use the shoulders on I-205 and zip past congestion. So what we've proposed is an all-day weekday through Saturday hourly schedule on this route, plus extra frequency at rush hours, long rush hours. So every 30 minutes, weekday mornings and afternoons. That's Route D. Route E, this would be another route between Wilsonville and the Salem-Keizer area, but this one would go to Woodburn and Keizer instead of going straight to downtown Salem. And we've proposed, this is a new route that's already being piloted by Chariots, and so Wilsonville would be coming along and providing more trips into the schedule. The same way that you share service right now on the 1X with Chariots, you'd be sharing service for this route between Keizer and Wilsonville with a stop in Woodburn. This would be on the west side of Woodburn at the transit center that's just east of the freeway on the west side of Woodburn, as opposed to there's another route on 99E, which is on the east side of Woodburn. So this would help people get to that west side of Woodburn. Route F, would be just a local route, doesn't go anywhere regionally, but it's the second route I'm describing that would go essentially up and down most of Wilsonville Road. So this means a lot of service on Wilsonville Road. This would connect Villebois, Wilsonville Road, the Fred Meyer, the Town Center, and then Frog Pond. Every half-hour weekday through Saturday, every hour on Sunday. So this would help people do a lot of shopping locally. And it would also help people get to places where they can make a transfer to a route that's going maybe to a regional destination. This is kind of like your existing Villebois shuttle, but longer and much more frequent. It's really there for people all the time. And finally, proposed route G. You could really think of this as two routes. You'll see on the map it's very loop-de-loop. We do not expect anybody to get on in Villebois and get off in the town center. They would be riding quite an adventure. But basically, you need a north-south route on the west side of your freeway, you need a north-south route on the east side of the freeway, and people kind of need to overlap at the top. People on the east side need to go to the west side up there in the north and vice versa. So you might as well run them as a big loop-de-loop. So this would go Villebois, the West and Transit Center, and then up 95th, and over to Argyle Square, and then south to the town center. Now, it would also make early morning trips to Coffee Creek to pick up people who might be getting released early in the morning, and it could also make trips to Coffee Creek on request whenever somebody needed to request it. And this we're proposing to essentially match the level of frequency that you've long been providing on routes 5 and 6, which do this same pattern, and that's every 30 minutes, not just strictly rush hours, a little bit of longer period than rush hours, but basically morning, afternoon, and evening, every 30-minute service. So let me show you a visual representation of the frequency improvements. What I'm showing on the screen is a graphic that illustrates the frequency of your current, your 2022 bus. They're a little cut because of the operator shortage, but your 2022 bus routes, each row is a route, each column is an hour of the day. And then the color in the box indicates the approximate frequency. So blue is the most common color, and blue stands for every 30 minutes. Light green stands for every 60 minutes. Purple is every 20, and red is every 15. And then that grayish color is more than every 60 minutes. So a bus isn't even coming once an hour. And so these are the frequencies of your routes as they were operating in 2022, which is our baseline for this study. And then here is the proposed frequency for 2028. So first of all, you can see there's much less of a gap. There's much less white space during the midday between about 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. So we're proposing that every route but one run all day long, which means it's good for not just working, and it's good for not just people who work office jobs. It's good for people who work retail jobs and work in healthcare and service and industry and who are traveling at midday. You can also see it's a little bit longer. It starts a little earlier in the morning. It ends a little later in the evening. And you can see there's more blue. There are more routes offering a 30-minute frequency for more of the day. So better frequencies, longer hours of service, more all-day service. And this is the weekday. By the way, I should have said, I don't mind being paused for questions at all. I can't tell what's happening because I'm just looking at Zoom. But I don't know if your normal practice is to stop people for questions. So if it is, please feel free to interrupt me following whatever procedure you normally follow. Okay. Weekends. This is the same type of graphic for your current weekend schedule, your 2022 weekend schedule. And of course, you only operate on Saturdays, not Sundays. So you see there are 3 routes in service on weekends, the 2X, which offers 30-minute service with a little bit in the middle of the day of 60-minute service, and the 4, and then the Villebois shuttle makes, I think, 3 trips on Saturdays. And then this is what's proposed for weekends. So all routes but one offering a solid Saturday schedule of every 30, every 60, or every 120 minutes. And, of course, the introduction of Sunday service. And what we've proposed is 3 routes offering hourly service all day on Sunday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So this would be a really big investment in service, a big investment in vehicles, overhead staff required to turn on service on Sunday. The whole organization would have to switch on Sundays. So not just drivers, but also mechanics and supervisors, dial-a-ride drivers, dial-a-ride dispatchers would all have to start showing up on Sundays. But as we all know, almost everybody lives their lives 7 days a week. And not only do people want to go places on Sunday to visit and shop and see their family, there's also lots and lots of people who work on Sunday so that other people can go shopping and go to Starbucks and go to the hospital if they need to. So that is what this network would be for. It would be for those people, for all of us. What is the impact of this network on the population as far as we can measure? I'm showing now a graph that describes how many people are close to transit in the SMART 2022 network. So as of 2022, the first bar on this chart is just residents. What percentage of residents are close to transit? And the dark blue part of the bar is how many people are close to a bus coming every 30 minutes. The light blue part of the bar, the label got sort of scooted over, but that's how many people are close to a bus coming every hour. And then in gray, that means those people are not within a half-mile walk of a bus coming at any frequency. So what you can see is in the existing network, you've got 30% of people not within a half mile of any kind of transit service, fixed route transit service. So 70% of people are within a half mile. And then we have the same stats for residents in poverty and minority residents and for jobs. And we can contrast that with the same chart for the proposed 2028 network. Now, of course, we're not using, imagine guessed at future residents. We're still using existing residents, so this is not, a perfectly accurate prediction, but it is an estimate. And now you see that 28% of residents would be more than a half mile from transit. So we've only increased coverage by 2% of your residents inside the city. And that's not because we didn't try, actually. It's because you're actually already running fixed route transit on almost every street you could run it on. So there's not really a whole lot of gain to gain there. But the really big gain you can see is in how many people are near more frequent transit. So I've circled just the number for residents in poverty. In your existing network, 36% of residents in poverty are near your most frequent transit, which is every 30 minutes. And in the 2028 network, that would increase to 52%. So similar number of people, maybe a little more people would be near some kind of transit, but a lot more people would be near transit that's actually coming fairly soon. And you can see an even bigger increase, not for residents of poverty, but for all residents. So that's what the increase in frequency would mean. You can also, if you look at the TMP report, we've also done the same kind of analysis, not about frequency, but about whether a route goes beyond the city boundaries. So how many people would be near a route that takes them to another city? Or how many jobs would be near a route that's coming from another city? And therefore, workers from another city might actually be able to come and work in Wilsonville. So the same kind of analysis can be done for that kind of regionalism. Now, that's weekdays. This is weekdays. Same kind of chart now for Saturdays. So 2022 network, 52% of residents are near transit, within a half mile of transit. And in the 2028 network, instead it would be 72% of residents near transit. So a big increase. So there's lots more charts like that in the TMP document itself if you're interested, and I'm happy to take questions about this. Okay, so that was a little bit about the outcomes of the proposed 2028 network. What are some of the other elements of the actual proposal and some of the implications of delivering all this amazing, more frequent service all day, all week long? So one thing is transit vehicles and related vehicle infrastructure. You would need to increase the size of your fleet. You wouldn't have to increase the size of your peak fleet that's out on the road every day by very much, because so much of the service increase is not at peaks. It's not at rush hours. It's at the midday and on the weekend. So your overall fleet size wouldn't have to grow a lot, but it would absolutely have to grow. And wear and tear on vehicles would grow because they're getting used a lot more. And so you would need more spares. And of course, your fleet is aging, as all fleets are. And also, it's very difficult right now to buy buses. So Wilsonville is having the same challenges that every other transit agency in the U.S. is having, which is having to wait a long time to buy new buses. So your maintenance staff have been doing an amazing job of keeping a very resilient and flexible fleet going, including using some buses that you otherwise might have retired by now. But there's a lot of investment that needs to happen around the fleet. Your peak fleet, meaning buses on the road at the busiest time for you, would go from 18 to 23. And that covers both your fixed routes, like all the maps I showed, plus your dial-a-ride service. So that increase, plus what I said about needing to be prepared for replacing an aging fleet and managing wear and tear. That also means some more maintenance infrastructure. You would need to invest in new chargers for battery electric buses, as well as some of the other kind of background facility improvements that keep the fleet healthy. We also specifically have recommended that you use large vehicles for your fixed routes, because all of your fixed routes go past schools, and many of your fixed routes we also expect will get fairly high ridership because they're helping people travel long distances to busy places. And when you have fixed routes that are going to be busy, even if they're only busy once during the day, you really have to put out the biggest vehicle you need to handle how busy they are so that everyone can still get a seat and ride them safely. And so I know that there's people like the idea of smaller vehicles because they're quiet and they look cuter on the roads, and they don't, people don't like seeing empty big vehicles. But the truth is, you have to put out the biggest vehicle you're going to need all day long. And we actually think if you implement this network, you're actually going to need big vehicles on almost all of these routes. For big vehicles, we're recommending that you obtain a mix of battery electric buses and CNG buses. They both have their benefits. They both have some constraints. CNGs are generally the market for CNGs is more mature. More is known about how to operate them. They aren't limited by needing to charge at certain times. So you don't want to go too fast to battery electrics and abandon CNG completely. So we recommend continuing with a mix of those two technologies. Your maintenance yard. A project is already underway to do preliminary design and estimate the cost of expanding your maintenance yard. That is a long-planned project, and it's absolutely now due. And certainly the kinds of increases in service and increases in the size of your fleet that are foreseen in this plan would require absolutely that expansion of the maintenance yard. A town center terminal facility. So I hope this is welcome. I read your town center plan, which is awesome, and we can add something to it in the sort of call and response that happens between land use planning and transit planning and land use planning and urban design. We want to call back to the land use planners and the urban designers, hey, you should probably have a place in your town center where bus routes can cross each other and people can make a really nice transfer between bus routes. It's going to make sense for your system to not have its only transit center on one side of the freeway. You really have, a city with a divider in the middle with certain places that you can cross, but not that many places when you can cross. And some of your bus routes are going to make connections on the east side, and it will just make good sense for people, and it will save them time if they can make a transfer over there rather than riding all the way to the transit center. So we've recommended a facility, some kind of small place where you can end a bus route and the driver can take a break. And also, people can change from that bus to another bus going to another place. It does not have to be big. It can be quite small. It can even be on the street. So we've made some descriptions of that and some principles for what would be good locations for that facility. But I hope that it dovetails nicely with the work you're doing around your town center plan to update that part of town. Additional personnel. So obviously, adding more buses in service during the day on the weekends, you would have to employ more bus drivers who will drive the buses, but there are other personnel who are kind of behind the scenes who would need to be added, and it's pretty significant. You would need about 120 more supervisor hours per week, about 44 more dial-a-ride dispatcher hours per week, a full-time customer service person, so about 40 hours per week, and then at least 40 hours more maintenance time for one person, as well as some additional maintenance time for a maintenance supervisor, an additional mechanic. So there's some important overhead roles that would need to be invested in continuously as you grew your system to be bigger and better. The Regional Customer Service Center, as I said before, this is a project that is sort of continuing the momentum you've already built. SMART has done a lot of work to make partnerships with some of your neighboring providers and to offer an integrated regional useful transit system to the public. And so offering a customer service center where people can come in person as well as call and get help. And also this includes a website and integrated transit planning and fare information and all that. So what are the next steps for this process? Brenda can talk about the public consultation that's happening in the next couple of weeks, and so can Kelsey. The draft transit master plan is out there, available for public comment. It's been sent to the people who attended the stakeholder workshop, as well as other people who took the survey and expressed interest over the past year. Please help us promote the survey. We'd be very grateful if you can also send this around to your networks. It is live on Let's Talk Wilsonville until I guess April 22nd through April 21st. And then we're coming back to you on May 10th, and I think what we're expecting to do is tell you what we heard from the public and tell you if there are any revisions to the plan based on that, as well as take additional comments from yourselves. And then the city council hearing is currently, I think this might, Kelsey, correct me if I'm wrong, is it still scheduled for June 19th, or is there a possibility of it being rescheduled?
It is still currently scheduled for June 19th.
Okay. All right. So currently planned for June 19th for city council hearing. We would not presume adoption, but hopefully by then we'll have collected enough public input and made revisions that city council feels confident in adopting. And then from there, we'd love to hear what you think, if you've had a chance to read the plan, if you have any questions based on what we presented. Kelsey, do you want to say any closing remarks before we take comments?
No, I'm really just interested in hearing from the commission.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Gallagher?
Did I look like I had a question?
Your magic number came up, so I wanted to check and make sure.
I do have a question.
Perfect.
I feel very fortunate that I was a part of one of your questioning evenings. It was a lot of fun. One of the things that I was very aware of at my table and also in the room is there were a lot of questions and a lot of demand, it appeared, to have the route extend up to Costco and Target by a number of people. And I'm not sure that was factored in. Is that something that might be under consideration for the future? And if not, why not?
So we're talking, I believe, about Argyle Square. We currently do have bus stops at that location now and would continue to. So that would be, which route is that, Michelle? That is?
What's proposed is that route B would go there. That's every half hour, Monday through Saturday, hourly on.
That was one.
And also route G. Route G is the rush hour weekday route. They would both go there.
Yeah, these were people who wanted to be able to go there during the day and shop and be able to get back home during the day, not at rush hour. And
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Neal?
I read in some past notes about WES that they were thinking about increasing the times and having it going in the middle of the day, but now I read that now WES might be off the table. What is the plan with WES?
It's a great question. We currently, our current plan, so just to be clear, WES is run by TriMet. It's not our service. We collaborate with TriMet. Obviously, it comes here to Wilsonville. We have an agreement with them that goes through 2026. The future of that isn't clear. We don't know what that's going to look like necessarily, but currently, you're right, the frequency before the pandemic was every half hour, rush hour only, so it stops during the middle of the day. It went down to 45 minutes every 45 minutes. That's what it is currently. There have always been calls for that to be more frequent. As far as I know, there's no current plans for that to be more frequent. And yeah.
I mean, one thing that just might be helpful context to know is that the operating cost per hour of WES is rather high compared to MAX trains even, but especially compared to buses. So I assume that I have not been in these conversations with TriMet, but I assume that for them, when they're looking at what they can afford to do, or even when they're just thinking about how many drivers they have, they have to basically spend extra to run WES compared to everything else they run. Because WES requires 2 staffed personnel for every train, whereas MAX requires 1, buses require 1. So it's a fairly high-cost service for them to provide. So that might affect decisions.
Commissioner Mesbah.
Isn't one of your routes proposed to go to Tualatin, basically take the load off of WES, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, part of what we would like to accomplish is give people an all-day, all-week WES. Because WES is doing a movement that's important in the region, right? It's connecting Beaverton, Tiger, Tualatin, Wilsonville. This is very important. But TriMet's never been able to get it up to the level of service that would actually generate a lot of ridership, and that would be decent frequencies, but also all day. Because so many people traveling among those places, they need to be able to travel, not just at rush hour. And they need to be able to travel on weekends, a lot of them. So yes, part of what the proposed B would be, and it could be run as a supplement to WES. I joked, I don't know, like 8 years ago, I joked, they should just drive a bus and put WES on the head sign and just say it's the midday WES, and just make the same stops so that people could make their trip at any time of the day. So yes, to some degree, the B would be the all day, all week WES, but it would do some extra things, of course, that WES doesn't do. It would provide a lot of local mobility within Wilsonville, especially on Canyon Creek Road, which isn't currently served. So more than just WES, but it is absolutely part of our intention to provide for that movement that WES hasn't been able to provide for all day, all week.
And if I understood correctly, WES costs more than a bus would. Do you have any idea how the two compares? Would WES essentially be the same price as your full service bus?
I would have to look up the numbers, but when I remember looking into this a few times over the last 10 years, the per hour operating cost per hour of a WES train moving around is much higher than the per hour operating cost of a bus moving around, whether it's a TriMet bus or certainly a SMART bus, because SMART has a lower operating cost than TriMet. So for whatever frequency WES is delivering, however many trains they've got out, someone else should be able to put that many buses on the road for less. Or another way to say it is you should be able to put more buses on the road and therefore provide a better frequency.
For the same amount of money.
But what WES does that a bus can't do yet is it's fast. It gets past all the congestion, right? And buses could do that if they had the exclusive right-of-way, but they mostly don't. So that's a powerful thing about WES, but without the frequency and the all-day, all-week schedule, it just hasn't been able it hasn't created the ridership that people hoped it would.
Is there shoulder lanes not available to any buses that go to Tualatin?
I will have to defer to Kelsey on that.
You made mention one of these routes had access to shoulder lanes. I didn't know if the same applied to that.
Yes, we currently run what is 2X today runs, a little portion of it does run on the shoulder, and that to Tualatin today, and that has been very effective. It has helped us to have better on-time performance, so our buses are getting to where they need to go closer to their on-time more often. So when we have that, I'm sure you're all familiar with this traffic movement that happens in the afternoon, especially, if you're leaving on Wilsonville Road, it's very congested. So we do get to use the shoulder for brief parts of that trip to Tualatin currently. The Route B service that we're talking about proposing here would use that same shoulder to Tualatin, but we don't have a similar right-of-way on the shoulder between Tualatin and Tigard. It's very specific places that we can be in the shoulder, but we've been working with ODOT, and they've been a great partner with us for looking at other places where we could be on shoulder. The other route that Michelle was mentioning that we're talking about is the one that's going to go to Clackamas Town Center on I-205. So we're looking at shoulder on I-5 that we currently use, which is working really well, and we're looking to replicate that same success on I-205. So we would love to continue to have more places where we could use the bus on shoulder.
I guess my questioning was trying to get to whether or not this would be a replacement for Wes. I know there are train enthusiasts who want to perpetuate the option of riding trains, but if you can get, for about the same amount of money, a better service as public entities, I think it behooves us to search for those solutions. Thank you.
Commissioner Willard?
Among my circle of people that I know in the community that really need more access to public transit, they tend to not have driver's licenses and be attracted to jobs in big warehouses like the Amazon distribution warehouses. And many of the jobs being offered with premium wages are night work, shift work. And none of your offerings could help with that demand. And so I'm wondering, in your outreach, did that come up as a topic of people need to get access to these high-paying jobs that are night work outside of the region?
It's a great question. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then Brenda, if you have more that you want to add, please do. So we certainly have heard from folks about wanting to address people who need to do a commute or some sort of movement at a time that we're not currently serving. We definitely heard that. So we were trying to address longer hours or later hours, and just not a traditional 8 to 5 sort of schedule, other kinds of schedules. One thing that we kind of outside of this plan that we've been particularly promoting lately is van pools. So that is a great option for shift workers because there isn't a lot of, other than for specific groups of people, a lot of reason to do a fixed route service at say 2 a.m. But that could be, a van pool could be a great option for, 6 or 12 people who do want to take transit or take a public, some sort of public, not their own personal vehicle. So we're very much promoting that right now, and we're hoping to expand it. I think we have particularly been thinking about the Amazon warehouse that's in Woodburn. And that's part of the reason that we've been eyeing the Woodburn service and trying to see what that looks like. I think we'll certainly continue to look at when those shifts are and when they actually open. But that's a great alternate to having a fixed route service is van pools or, something that's a little bit more like that, that's a little bit more flexible. So if a shift, say, they add a new shift, you can be much more flexible with a van pool because someone could start that up one month and end it the next month, and that's, pretty easy to do.
And in this case, my familiarity with van pools are usually more corporation private employer motivated. What would it be with respect to Wes, or Smart, rather?
It could be, you're right, there often are employers who want it to be specifically for their businesses, but what the van pool program that we have now is open to anyone. So it could be 5 neighbors, they want to get, they just happen to be going the same places at the same time. It doesn't have to be a specific employer. We have 1 van pool going right now. We're really looking to expand that. So it is open currently.
Okay.
So if you know of folks who are interested or coming from a certain location, we've been doing a lot of work with specific employers, but also just, folks who are coming from the same places.
Yeah, that's good to know. Okay.
Brenda, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that van pool is exactly the answer I would have given. I think ultimately the survey we did in the fall was really trying to focus on how fixed route could better benefit Wilsonville. And I think, most of the time fixed route buses are not the best for the type of work that, jobs like Amazon and kind of delivery jobs and warehouse jobs provide. And so, exactly what SMART is doing and helping offer van pools is exactly how to kind of address those niche needs outside of the time that you would be able to run transit buses. And then I think, survey-wise, we ask people why they use transit, but we really try to focus on the priorities that we could kind of think about as trade-offs for fixed route, and that was, connectivity, coverage, frequency, things like that.
Follow up?
Sure.
Do you have van pools on the website right now? If somebody looks at Smart's website looking for options, does that pop up?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Right? Great.
And we do have, I just want to, one more plug, since there seems to be an interested audience. We are offering, through a grant that we have from the state, we're offering subsidies for those vans. So we're trying to get folks to basically pay down the cost of it to get those van pools started. So we will subsidize the cost so that it comes down for someone who's, trying to get into it, but maybe it sounds a little bit too expensive and they're not really sure. It's really a great way to get people away from having to use their personal vehicle and, just having another option.
Commissioner Carr?
So I'm looking at the finances of it, and Table 5 in the documentation was the straight out of our budget. But what I'd like to see is if these changes are put in place, what does that budget look like? Because it seems like, as I think you kind of alluded, there's a substantial price increase or a cost increase for providing this extended service and hours. And so I'd just like to see what it would look like if the 2028 plan's put in place.
Okay. So in the budget document itself, what we currently have in the master plan is rough costs of what that would increase to. One thing to keep in mind is that this certainly isn't something that we would do from one budget year to the next. It would be a gradual process. And part of that is just logistics of, we would have to hire more staff and purchase more buses. So we see this as a gradual process.
Sure.
But yeah, we can work on kind of a snapshot of what a 2028 budget might look like.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hendricks?
Thanks. Yeah. First, just thank you for the presentation and the draft plan. I just think it's exciting to see kind of like the growth and ambition in the plan. So that was really cool to see. I was going to ask about just the budget impacts, so I would like to see that as well. So thanks for mentioning that. The one thing that I keep thinking about are those limitations with, bus operators and just the the pieces and all of that. It seems like that could have big impacts on, where we want to go. And so I guess my question is, if we don't see improvement in those areas, is this just going to kind of result in a prioritization exercise of what we want to do with what we have, or how much do we think it will impact kind of what we want to achieve by 2028?
That's a great question. we alluded to it a little bit in the plan. There are some pretty big barriers right now that we're dealing with, and that's not having enough buses or drivers. That is an impact for us today. We don't have full service today. Yeah. We're getting back up to full service. However, it's kind of, this is put together so that we could really phase in these new routes. We probably would focus on the ones that we heard about the most. We've certainly heard a lot of focus on frequency, more frequency, so we probably would start with that. We have been working and we've been committed to this route to Clackamas Town Center for quite a while, so that would probably be one of those next focus points. But I think we'd continue to check in with the community and, you know, with our council and to see what those priorities are. But I think it's been helpful for us to have multiple check-ins with the community. And as part of our annual onboard survey, I think that we would continue to ask that, like, which of one of these is your highest priority? And that is actually one of the questions that we put into the survey that's live now, is of the things that we have proposed, which of these are the highest priority for you? So that's going to be helpful for us as we kind of phase into this, to know which ones we can do first. And you know, we're realistic. We realize that this is not something we're going to be able to do next year. That's why when we talk about this plan, we keep saying 2028. We're not saying 2024 because we know that's not realistic. But we have this sort of the steps in place to get there. So Michelle mentioned earlier, one of the things we need to do is a yard expansion so that we can have enough room for all of these buses. We just started the design process for that about a week ago. So we're working on those steps first, and then we'll kind of move into it. So we see this as a gradual process, and if we do have a place where we're struggling between, you know, do we move forward with this expanded frequency of, you know, the new F route as opposed to the B route, we'll probably want to go out to the public and ask what's the most important thing today for everyone. So
that helps, and it's good to hear, just that continuous engagement and check-in, just to see how things kind of change over time. So I appreciate that. And the other thing I was thinking about reading through the draft was just that the trade-off question between, I think it was like ridership and coverage. And I think what I saw was that there was only a small amount of folks who said that like coverage should be prioritized more. But then one of those key takeaways was that regional connections, which in my mind is like, well, that's a lot more coverage. So I'm just curious, and maybe this was back to like a prioritization question again, I don't know, but did I misinterpret that, or do those two things do kind of conflict, where like it seems like the community didn't really want that, but then we're asking for the regional coverage as well? How do we balance?
Yeah, that is a key question that certainly Michelle asked early on as part of this process, our consultant. Coverage, when we say coverage, typically that means coverage of the city. So if you live in every neighborhood in town, is there bus covered? Is there a bus service, close to every place in town? So it's usually coverage versus ridership. So what is your focus? Sometimes that can mean, is it better to have more frequency, or is it better to have everyone have a bus close to them? Right. And you're right, it's usually sort of 50-50. So we tried to balance that.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe in the plan, if we are talking about like local cover, that trade-off as a local issue, maybe we frame it that way in the plan a little bit more so it's clear. And then just a note on the conversation about the west, because when I saw the Route B, I was like, okay, so it does look like it's competing a little bit with the train. And I know, Michelle, you were joking about like the west on the bus kind of idea, but I like it. I like the idea of trying to like complement, but I also see like that consistency and just being able to know where to go, either the bus or the train. I get it being all day, but I also think one step is just complementing the west for now. But yeah, I'm interested to see how that develops over time, and it'll really just depend too on the partnership. I love the route, I'm forgetting which route it is, but the one that you're working more with Chariots on. I like that partnership concept where you're sharing kind of the route. I think that's super cool. So I think, yeah, I think those were my thoughts. Thanks. Thank you.
Commissioner Carr.
So with, I think you said current bus coverage is 18 buses. It would go up to 23. What does that look at from number of drivers? How many drivers do you currently have or need? And then compare that to what you would need in 2028.
That's a complex question. I'll start, and then I know that Michelle has more to say about that. It's complex, particularly because we can change schedules pretty easily. So that might mean, for example, more full-time schedules and fewer split shifts, meaning they don't have, kind of like our bus service. You know, if we had more all-day service, there would be fewer drivers working in the morning and then having a big break in the middle and then coming back. So it doesn't, certainly we would need more drivers in the end. For sure, we'd need more drivers, but not necessarily the same, it wouldn't necessarily be like a curve that would be really stark. Michelle?
Yeah, like, it is complicated, man. It's not just math, actually, it's a craft, writing the bus schedules and then writing the driver shifts. It's called rostering of designing the pieces of work that actual human beings can go and do that are civilized for them. So it's not, we can't just calculate the number of buses needed and from that get to how many drivers you would need per week. But I can say, saying the same thing Kelsey said in a slightly different way, the 2028 network would increase the number of vehicle revenue hours. So that's the number of hours that you have a bus and a driver out on the road providing service. The number of hours that service on the road per week would increase by 171%. So that's more than doubling. The number of vehicles you need would not go up by nearly that much, right? Because I already said it would go, your peak vehicle requirement would go from 18 to 23. That's not more than doubling. And that's because so much of the increase would be outside of those peaks. The increase in how many staff you need would probably also not go up by 171%. It would go up by something less than that. You do need a staff person in every single vehicle hour on the road. But like Kelsey said, having a more all-day schedule would make it a little more efficient to staff the service. So I just had to throw out a guess. I would say to get to 171% more service than you have today with these kinds of schedules, you'd probably have to double your driver roster. I'm completely guessing, but that's like an order of magnitude kind of guess. So you wouldn't have to increase it by as much as you've increased service. You would have to increase it by more than you're increasing your peak fleet. Yes.
Okay. And then one of the,
you can come find me in 5 years and tell me how wrong I was.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. And then the other one is about grants. We have always been very effective in gaining grants. Are we still hitting out of the park as we have in the past?
I feel it would be self-serving to say yes because I'm the grants manager. But yes, there's been a great history at SMART of lots of really exceptional, a lot of grants and good management of those grants. And there's, I think, has been a renewed interest and a renewed understanding in the importance of transit since the pandemic. And there is right now a lot of funding out there. So that's not, funding this is actually really not our main concern. It's more drivers and buses that that's the constraint at this point.
Drivers, buses, and parts. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting parts, that's absolutely part of it. Yes, of course, it will require more funding, but at this moment, I can say we're pretty confident that we will be able to get that funding and craft the story, because this expansion of service it's really I mean, it's what public transportation is about, right? It's making transportation open to everyone, making it possible for people to get around to jobs and all the things that they need to do. It just makes stepping back, it makes our society much more possible for everyone. So I think as a grant writing exercise, it's a pretty good story to be able to tell, like how this would help our community and how it would help our community members get to other places that they want to go.
All right. I'll try to make mine quick. It's not normally the case, but we'll give it a shot. I want to echo Commissioner Carr's recommendation on the finances side. I really struggle with putting together my opinion on this without being able to really dig into the numbers and see what all this extra service is going to cost. So that is a key for me in terms of moving forward to see added to this plan is what that expenditure would look like in 2028 or a 3-year phase from 2028 to 2031, whatever it might happen to be. But to see what that increase in cost is. I would also like to see ridership numbers. I'm not sure if I just missed it in the plan or if it was intentionally omitted. I saw a % change from 2019 ridership numbers, but no actual ridership numbers. And so for me, again, looking at I'm a numbers person, I want to know how much it costs per passenger for the current service, and what would that look like moving forward with the new service, and what do we estimate for ridership increase as a result of these new ride times and new frequencies, and all those types of things play into, does it make sense for the city and its residents to spend this extra money on the service? And those are key pieces of information that I need to be able to make an informed decision. What else did I have? Transit center nodes, having 2 of them. So if WES discontinues service in 2026, is 2 transit center nodes still the right solution?
I think I'll let Michelle speak to this as well, but the transit center where it is, certainly WES is complementary to it, but it was there before, and we still have 2 sides of town, regardless of WES. That's the main, from my perspective, that's the main reason why, as inefficient as it feels to have 2 transit centers, we do effectively have 2 sides of town that, as a pedestrian, we try to make it safe, but it does not feel safe to cross under a freeway. So I think that those are still some necessary pieces. And part of that is to make those connections more efficient for the passengers, for the rider, so that they don't feel like they're spending a lot of time waiting or a lot of time kind of going around in a circle in order to get where they want to go. So, Michelle, do you have more to add to that?
That's what I would say. And what we're proposing for the east side does not have to be a transit center like what you have on the west side. We're envisioning something quite small. All you need is to be able to end a bus route there, which means you need to be able to park a bus. Driver needs to be able to use the restroom and sit down someplace and eat their lunch. And you need a nice bus stop and shelter where someone can wait for the connecting bus. So it's really, we're calling it a terminal facility because it's not a big center. But it is a place where service naturally converges, and you always want your transit centers where service naturally converges. So you're not running buses out of direction to get to a transit center. They just cross each other, and that's where people want to transfer. And in addition to the pedestrian issues that Kelsey described about, having your city be fairly divided by the freeway, it's also hard to drive a bus across the freeway because there are so few crossing points. I mean, you know this, that congestion gets concentrated at what few crossing points there are. So as your network grows, you're naturally going to want to be able to terminate 1 and maybe 2 routes without crossing the freeway, not having every route go to both sides of the freeway on every trip. And that, again, implies having a place you can end a bus route on the east side. So it'd be pretty small transit center, but it's suggested by the way that people want to move and the way that it's efficient to run your service. And that really comes from the freeway more than West.
Okay. Commissioner Carr, looks like you got a follow-up.
Yeah, so you just got me, with that last comment, you got me thinking. So they're going to do the pedestrian overpass over I-5. Why don't we make it like a Tillicum Bridge, where it's transit and pedestrian? Of course, it's already probably been designed and. Sorry, City. Sorry.
If I may add, if I may add to this conversation, so for the audience listening, I'm Miranda Bateshell, Planning Director with the City of Wilsonville. We have done, as you know, the Town Center Plan as well as the I-5 bike pedestrian bridge design work. That project has been in the TSP for a long time now, and particularly in our bike and pedestrian plan. And so it's an important piece of the network. In the discussions that we've had in that project, we actually looked into the possibility of transit over that. Putting a full-size bus is a significant investment and becomes costly at the point where it would be prohibitive for that facility. However, we are in an age where things are changing pretty frequently, and one of the changes we're seeing are the small autonomous transit vehicles. And so we actually designed the bike and pedestrian facility, the crossing over I-5, to be compatible with and be able to carry small autonomous transit vehicles that could act as shuttles between the transit center and the town center. As part of that, I think a lot of that work was being discussed and the opportunity for it at the time of the town center plan as well, which is why some of you will recall that on the Park Place connection, there's a desire in the future, once we have the connectivity in the town center that we need, Park Place is likely going to be turned into a promenade of some sort, a bike, pedestrian facility, a facility that might offer amenities for adjacent storefronts. And in that, because it's quite a bit of right-of-way, one of the things we also noted was the potential for that to serve transit. So it'd be closed to private vehicular circulation, but be a potential space that could provide for our transit needs. So if the autonomous vehicles need to be there or a bus wants to pull into that space temporarily, that could be a good facility or space for it. But it is a ways out, obviously, because we need the other connections to be developed before that could occur. But so just a few things that we have done to try to integrate that compatibility with transit across that pedestrian bridge where we can.
A transit hub in the town center is, I think, one of the things we were talking about and looking at when we were designing the town center as well. We were wanting to make sure it had transit, but as a hub of the community, having a transit hub there would really add to the gravity or the gravitational pull of it. At least until, if you're looking about future, we have flying buses where your bridge wouldn't be encumbered anymore.
Those are airplanes.
So, no, I think having a hub in the town center is actually a really good thing to have in the plan.
Yeah, my question was more is if West goes away, does it make sense to have two, or do you focus it in town center and create that as the transit center?
It would be good if you had a distance between where a hub would be and the transit center now. Is that about, what, a mile or so, or is it less than that?
I think it's, yeah.
If it's within walking distance, this issue comes up. If not, you may need to have east side, west side kind of stuff anyway.
It's certainly, I think it is very possible that we will be talking about this in the next iteration of our transit master plan. Certainly, once the I'm just going to say, once it is built, not if it's built, but when the pedestrian bridge is built, that connection, the pedestrian connection will be there. As Miranda said, I've already tried to look around for funding to see if we can get funding for autonomous shuttles. The transit FTA is not there yet. They're not ready for that. I think they're feeling like that's a flying bus for them. But when we're coming back to you with our, let's see, 2030, whatever that next transit master plan is, that likely will be part of the conversation. And I think you're right, Commissioner. There is certainly a possibility that if things change with the WES and that transit center is less prominent, maybe we may focus more of our attention to the town center transit center, possibly build it up or just make those connections different. The beauty of bus service is that it is more flexible, so we could change that if the prominence continues to shift. And I think we,
ride.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up.
Okay, last follow-up, because we are late.
We are definitely late. We're way past 30 minutes. One of also, this is, you're an old timer when you remember stuff from 10 years ago. One of the other discussions about the TOD proposal next to the transit center is to look at that whole stretch as a potential for transit-oriented development, kind of a corridor. And if that happens, then you're going to have the critical mass to maintain a transit hub there. So we need to look at these bigger, more universal pictures as we throw stuff away, which probably also applies to WES. I don't know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all of your comments. This is very helpful to us.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, next up, yet again, Mr. Pauly, Frog Pond East and South.
Minutes, huh?
We took half of your 60 minutes, so here's 30. Enjoy.
Dan Pauly, Planning Manager. So I do expect this to be less than 60 minutes. That's up to you. But this is a fairly light meal as Frog Pond East and South go. So. Let me. Yeah, I'll get to it here. I'm not finding it, I'm sorry. It's just on the desktop. Okay, I can find that. Okay, thanks. Okay, so as the commission knows, we've been working on implementation, including the development code amendments, which there's a fair amount, and we've done this a number of times. So actually tonight, we'll have a combination of, have a couple new things, but also I'll be bringing back some things that we had direction to continue to work on. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. And as always, first of all, it's just me tonight. This is so light tonight that the consultants haven't even joined me. So let's get into it. And as always, we'll pause briefly or as long as needed after each one to discuss, ask questions, as there's quite a hodgepodge of things we're covering tonight. So first of all, let's get into a couple of follow-up code amendments. The first one, discretionary alternative path, is something that should be fairly fresh in your minds from last month. What I recall from last month, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, is that the commission was comfortable with the approach for Frog Pond East and South and the additional criteria we put forward. However, there was a discussion about, well, this is a good idea. We should have some standards for the rest of the city and have a similar process for the rest of the city. So, so we have looked at that. And really looking into it is those standards are actually already in the code for both the planned development residential zone as well as Old Town. It's just not clear how they relate to the waiver process. So it's actually a fairly easy code fix to just go in and clarify that either if you're requesting alternative to design standards, either in the PDR zone or to the architectural, the Old Town standards, that it is a waiver process regardless of zone, and then the code will have kind of specific standards for each of the zones as needed, where, generally the PDR covers most of the city and the design standards for most of the city, but where there's specific unique standards such as East and South and Old Town, there are some additional. I will note another addition we put in there to kind of cover citywide is that anytime there is a master plan, we do look at the master plan as part of that and conformance and meeting the spirit and intent of that master plan as part of approving a waiver to any of the standards that are established. So that is all I had to say for now on that. Actually, one other thing, it says DRB waiver here, but I'll just note as a side note, we won't necessarily get into this, but there's potential that that waiver process may change for a number of reasons that I won't spend time on tonight, but just note we may be coming back to discuss, what's an administrative waiver versus a DRB waiver at a future time. So any questions, comments about the waiver process? Are we on the right track? Anything additional you'd like to see?
Commissioner Carr?
The changes you're talking about in the future, is that citywide changes in the?
Yeah, it'd be citywide,
classification? Okay.
potentially driven by state statute, so.
Of course.
I appreciate the kind of follow-up, and I think this, kind of gets at what we were talking about last time, so I'm comfortable with it.
Okay.
I think you're
Are we
good,
good to
Dan.
move on then? Okay, I imagine this will have a bit more discussion. So back in January, if you can remember that far back, one of the many things that we talked about in that work session is this notion from the master plan about green focal points as a central focal point from an urban form standpoint for each sub-district, and how this relates to the overall open space requirements for Frog Pond East and South. So besides having that urban design function of these focal points, there's also want to make sure that we're consistent and implement the open space requirement that exists for our residential zones, which is 25% of developable land. However, like SROZ and BPA area can credit towards that percent. And then a usable open space, half of that must be usable, meaning it's, programmed, active, which is 12.5% of developable land. So in January, broke it down by sub-district, had this big, huge table that really looked at size, location, other requirements. There was some concern that the size was too much. I mean, like 3/4 acre size, I think it was. And it wasn't flexible enough for kind of the different scenarios that we have. So where because there's some areas where there's not any, some sub-districts where there's really not any open space, where others easily will meet the open space even if there weren't these individual green focal points. And that's mainly due to the amount of SROZ or BPA easement. So really rethought that. We're always looking, as oftentimes when you're writing something large or complex like this, you start with some more complex and you kind of boil it down to try to get it to something more simple. So we are trying to do that. And so removing the table and essentially applying the requirements like we would in any of our PDR zones, to have that requirement and give the developers flexibility in meeting that requirement, just like we would elsewhere in the city, with just that provision that you do need the green focal points, but those green focal points just need to meet that minimum size that exists elsewhere in the city, which is 2,000 square feet generally. And it also gives that flexibility that if it makes sense to have multiple green focal points within a sub-district, that's a possibility too. It doesn't define that. I will note, as we look at this open space, I just want to kind of walk you through the different sub-districts. In East, essentially all the sub-districts in East anticipate to have pretty easy time meeting that 25% open space because of the amount of resource area and BPA easement. And the southern two sub-districts in South also would have a fairly easy time because of the amount of natural area. I will note something that still exploring that I'll come back on is when you look at the northern two sub-districts in South, so the small one north of the middle school, as well as the northernmost one along 60th, you have the proximity to the community park. So almost, if you have feedback on this, it hasn't been written into the code yet, but really want to acknowledge that fact as we think about those two sub-districts in particular, and getting credit essentially somehow similar to how the other sub-districts get credit for the BPA area, that those would also get credit for being adjacent to this park. Exactly how that works, but if you have any feedback on that, welcome that. The part that's still keeping from what we talked about in January, there are instances where there's specific provisions that make sense or that we want to direct for the individual sub-districts in terms of location of at least one of the focal points. So that remains. And so where there is special thought or special considerations that's put in there, these include, at heads, at kind of trailheads where there's a crossing around the Grange, really keeping that green space around the Grange, acknowledging that the neighborhood park in East can serve as the green focal point, and then and as well as a plaza area as part of the Main Street can serve as one of the focal points. And then in South, there's the terminus of the future extension of Hazel Street would make good sense for a focal point as well. So there's some of those provisions that are kept in there. Also, there's still the direct access requirement, which is still defined similarly as it was last time of, you take no more than 2 streets to get to a park. And so that, in testing, doing some testing that seems to work. We're going to continue to do testing to make sure that we don't run into any unintended consequences there. So that may still be tweaked some as we continue our testing. One idea is to do proximity rather than the direction. I think proximity will be met anyway because, the sub-districts aren't that big. But with proximity, you can also still have that situation where maybe that green focal point ends up being tucked, kind of in a corner and not really accessible and in the open, and really meeting that intent of being a central kind of, from an urban design standpoint, a central point of the sub-district. So, but again, we're still testing because we don't want to have any unintended consequences. So with all of these, we're continuing to do that. So I will stop there as it relates to green focal points and open up for questions and discussion. Chair.
I'm happy.
All right, somebody's got to say something. I'll do it. I guess, not being here for the last meeting, my apologies. Around the direct access provision in the code, my question is it needed? Are we solving a problem that doesn't exist, putting that in the code? That's what I'm trying to figure out. And so if we didn't have that in there, what would be the effect? What could happen?
The worst case scenario is you have it tucked where it's like, it's on a back street or somewhere where it's not that accessible. It still exists. I think so I would say out of all of these, that's still in there now, but that's still, I would say, on the bubble, because I think we do need to run more scenarios to see really, as you say, is it something that we can simplify out, and really it's not going to be, how many scenarios are there where it is going to be an issue as we look at it? And if, 90% of the time it's not an issue, then why put it in the code?
Yeah.
Especially if there's potential unintended consequences. So we'll still look at that. There is reference to it in the master plan. So that's primarily why it's in here. But if we can meet the intent of the master plan without having to write it in code, that works too. So that will be something I'll note as a follow-up on this to continue to test that and refine that to see even if it's needed, and if so, if there's a simpler way to really state it.
Okay, sounds good.
Anything else? All right, well. Let's go into these new code amendments. These are pretty light tonight. It's just one of those things on the list that it's ready, so wanted to bring forward and discuss with you. The first one being Frog Pond Grange. For those of you part of the process, you'll recall, that's certainly a focus probably through the whole Frog Pond planning, besides being kind of in the icon and stuff, is like what's going to happen with that building? How do we preserve it? As a reminder, we did reach out to ownership during the master planning process, but that was unresponsive. So the assumption is, right, as we're approaching it now, is it's staying as it is. There's no immediate change to its use. And so we wanted to acknowledge that in the master plan. But at the same time, if as time passes, if there's a desire to do something that, there is language in there to preserve or steps, what happens if the Grange, if the organization no longer exists in the future and there's a desire to sell the property, what would happen? So there's definitely, we've heard it throughout the whole Frog Pond, particularly through this process, that there's community support to preserve and reuse the Grange building. It is something that's important to the community and really tied to the history of this area and the identity of this area. So the master plan does show essentially for this area, kind of a park use or a community use, a civic use, and that would say that, so to change the use or turn this into a residential development or something would require a change to the master plan. And then for preserving the building itself as a civic use, either under current ownership or future ownership, that any approval to change this area, that the building's to be preserved unless it's determined unfeasible, and there's specific language in the code what to consider, right? If truly structurally is not sound and it doesn't make financial sense to preserve it, then we just photograph it really well, and it may need to be torn down. As you know, buildings don't last forever generally. So, but to the extent it can be preserved, the provisions are in there to preserve it. So any questions about the Grange? Does it feel like we hit the mark on addressing that unique aspect of this area?
There was mention in the past of possibly moving the building. What does that do to anything as long as it stays on the same plat of land? All this would still apply?
It doesn't say you can't move it. Okay, so I mean, if it ended up being moved, don't anticipate it moving. And also there was, in the past, that was a lot more of a possibility when there was assumed like a roundabout at Frog Pond Lane. Because of right-of-way needs, and that likely you may need to move the building to accommodate right-of-way.
Well,
That's not the case now.
The widening of the road isn't going to impact?
At this point, the cross-section, it can be accommodated with the planned cross-section. So, but yeah, moving it, the code doesn't say you can't move it. It just says it needs to be preserved. Good question.
I think we're good for the next one.
Okay. So lastly tonight, there's a treed area up on the south side of Colley Road. And this was something that the property owner brought up. Testimony during the master planning process point out that, looking at an aerial, this looks like, valuable forest habitat. However, the testimony was it's an old tree farm. The understory is probably not significant. So as part of any application for development, the resource area is verified. So if it ends up that this area indeed is not significant, which we have seen in development in the past, particularly areas that were shown initially just based on an aerial photo that's going to be, that looks to be habitat area, but then you get in and underneath there's really nothing, and the trees aren't in that good of shape anyway, then they end up being removed. We just wanted to be sure if that were to happen, what happens to this land, right? We don't have to go back and go through a master planning process or something. It just clarifies that if that were to happen, it'd be type 3 urban form. So fairly straightforward, but happy to answer any questions there.
So because I believe it's got streams on either side of it.
Yeah, so there's kind of an upland area between those two streams. So this doesn't cover the riparian area along the streams. It's just kind of an upland area that's between those two streams.
So if it is deemed not to be ROZ, SROZ, I mean, it would obviously have to be supplied with a road.
Correct, a local street.
The local street.
Yeah.
So how much buildable area is there if you have to put a street?
Well, I mean, there's options, right? You could build multifamily or something in there. You could do cottages. Could be a good candidate to build cottages in the woods or something where, you minimize the infrastructure. So I think that's, a positive thing of kind of this urban form approach we have. Really, you do have flexibility. It doesn't mean you're going to have to fit 6 lots in there, so that means you're going to have to put a big, wide public street down the middle of that. It gives some flexibility.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else then? That's all I had. Is there anything else that, as Lena asleep at night thinking about Frog Pond, they're like, I wonder what Dan's doing on that part of the code, or?
Only in nightmares, not in dreams.
I just have a quick question on that last image that you showed around the SROZ, around that tree area.
Yeah.
I'm going to connect some of the dots of what you talked about earlier about the green focal points. Out of curiosity, if the builder wanted to make that a green focal point and it required bridges with paths, pedestrian paths to get to it, would that meet your rules in the prior section of accessibility by a road? It would not, or I'm just curious if that would qualify. And
So
if not,
yeah,
why
if
not?
the developer ended up making that the active open space for like those two nodes up there, generally it probably would, because you'd be able to go up to Collie as your first road and then over on Collie as your second road.
Okay, just curious if that would, if that was a good test
Or
case.
something, you should be able to use Collie to access that. So yeah, that may end up being, if it isn't essentially passive open space, it could be used, if it makes most sense from a development standpoint, it could end up being the required usable open space.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Polly. I appreciate this brief presentation.
Yeah, I'll make it up in the next couple months, I'm sure.
He reserves the time for a later month.
Chair, I just wanted to note, I see a couple members in the audience, and I'm seeing a testimony slip being handed to the clerk. However, this is not a hearing item, so technically we wouldn't be taking testimony at this time. And so I would just say that, as we've done in the past, at times we've invited those members in the public, either on Zoom or in City Hall, if they are interested in commenting after a work session and providing comments to the commission. We have done that at other times. So if you are interested in doing that this evening, then you would just want to make a note and discuss with the rest of your commission to decide if you would like to do that or not.
Do I have to make a note before I discuss it or after?
Our attorney's not here for Robert's rules, and I am not the expert. But I think we need to make a note that we're doing that because we had citizen testimony at the beginning and none was received. And so I think you just need to decide whether it's something you want to do this evening. I don't know that it needs a formal motion or anything.
Not opposed.
I'm not opposed.
I'm okay with hearing it.
Yeah, go for
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
We won't expose you for
Mimi, come on up.
Robert's rules.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Mimi Dukas with AKS Engineering here on behalf of West Hills Development. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. Now I feel like I need to make it really exciting so you'll invite me back next time. No, I don't. You provide the spiders, I don't. So it is a brief item tonight, so our comments are fairly brief. Staff's been continuing to keep us in the loop ahead of time so we can review the draft materials, and we did give them the same feedback I'm going to give you tonight. So generally, this is a much improved draft from the original draft with the big table and large sizes, so we appreciate the second draft of this. And generally, I think it's headed in the right direction. Our site, as you know, is in Frog Pond East. It's the Azar property, just north of Advance Road. And we've got special considerations because it's such a large piece of property. It spans 3 sub-districts, and so our considerations are a little special. So there's a few things about it. Number one, our primary concern is about how phasing happens with the focal points and making sure that we can develop those green focal points consistent with our phasing plan. So we don't want to start development clear on the east side and be trying to build a focal point clear on the west side. That's an exaggerated version, but generally we want the focal points to be built as the surrounding development is built. And I think that's our understanding with staff. The code's a little silent about it, so we just want everybody to understand our concern on it. So we have 3 sub-districts, And the mapping on the master plan does not actually show a green focal point in subdistrict E5, which is the middle subdistrict. I think that's because in the master plan, it shows a park on the north side, and then we have the community park on the south side. So we have the same proximity that staff referenced on the southern properties. They're adjacent to that park. So, how does that relate to the green focal point requirements? The tricky part is that our current design, not approved, not final, but we have shifted that park, so it's at the end of Brisbane Street. So it shifts that park a little bit. We think that gives it a great view shed down Brisbane. It's got a good relationship to the BPA corridor and the SROZ, but it kind of changes where that park is relative to the subdistricts. And so how does that relate to our green focal points and how the park... The green focal points are not entirely defined. We know within the Brisbane, the Main Street area, we need to do a plaza. That's super straightforward. But the rest of the focal points are kind of like, needs to be a green, happy thing. It can be a playground, it can be a splash pad. It's not, I'm having trouble distinguishing between just open space, improved open space, and a green focal point. And maybe they're one and the same, they're just a concentrated little thing. I don't know, I think it needs a little more refinement of the difference between a green focal point and a park. But regardless, our subdistricts are a little blurry in terms of how that community park or our neighborhood park is going to sit within those subdistricts. And will that park satisfy the green focal points? So could it satisfy the green focal points for E5 and E6 if there's enough goodies in that neighborhood park? Seems like it would. I don't know. The code's not clear enough to me to be able to say, yes, West Hills, we're in good shape, or no, we're not. So a little more clarity on that. And then we agree with the chair on the proximity standards. I think we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist with the subdistricts, which I just argued are mushy. If you're providing a green focal option in each subdistrict, you've already got proximity. You've satisfied a directional thing. I think it's more about openness and adjacency to a public way. I think your example of the SROZ area on the north end, on Collie, it's at the very edge of that subdistrict. It's on the very edge, which is what staff was saying they were trying to avoid. It's not actually a bad thing to put it there. But, so I think that proximity language is trying to solve a problem that is already solved with the subdistricts. So personally, we would prefer to just strike it. It's just one more layer of regulation that I don't think is necessary. And then I think it's a foregone conclusion, but we just have to say 25% of gross area for open space across the whole PRD, that's a big standard. I know it applies across the whole city. We're probably not going to tackle that here, but just comparing to other jurisdictions, 25% is pretty high. We see 20% of net is more common. That way people are not being penalized for public infrastructure, for roadways, for storm facilities. Sometimes storm is in, sometimes it's out, depending on how you define net. But that's a little bit more common. Basing it on gross can, it just doesn't acknowledge some of the public dedications you have to do. But that's more philosophical than practical, probably, for this conversation. So those are our comments for this evening. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mimi. Any questions from the commission? Mr. Polly, any follow-ups as a result of?
Yeah, so just a couple of things to clarify. And, in this version that, in fairness that Mimi saw, she didn't some of the references have some more information. So like the green focal points reference back to usable open space standards in 4.113, which has a big long list of precisely what's considered. So, I mean, that is pretty defined in that sense. The idea of openness and being adjacent to a public way for the green focal points, I think that's something that we can continue to work with, and I think that's a good direction for refinements, and so we'll come back to that. And just a comment on NetVerse is not truly gross because of this, the way that in typical we have so much area that's like in SROZ, so it's not truly 25% of net area because, and that's partly why we designed it the way we did, is because it's gross development area, so you're taking out the SROZ already, and then you actually get to count SROZ as part of that, rather than you'd actually, and oftentimes you'd be required more open space if you just took 20% of net, rather than being able to count that SROZ area towards your open space. And in this case, I mean, in the case of the Azar site, I mean, they have the BPA easement, which they can also use for usable open space. So really from an open space standpoint, I mean, those standards really work well for them compared to a typical development, because they have so much essentially land that otherwise isn't part of their net area that they can count towards their open space.
Again, it wasn't a problem for our site. It's more philosophical.
Yeah,
sure. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next up on the agenda, informational items. Ms. Bateshell, anything to comment on?
I have no items this evening, unless anybody has any questions.
Hearing none.
Mandy's giving us a look for something. Is it?
Well, I don't know if you wanted to mention the public hearing next month, but it's not.
Yes, so we did have a public hearing scheduled for.
Yeah, we have two, but
Yeah, so we're only doing one. Stormwater, it continues to be reviewed by our technical expert, or not the stormwater, sorry. The wastewater treatment plant continues to be reviewed, so it will come eventually.
Sounds good. All right, looks like we need a motion.
At the agenda at the end of the year, December and January have nothing there. Does that mean you're not having meetings?
Great question. For those that have been on the commission a while, they would know that the schedule is often in flux. And so we would unlikely cancel anything at this point because we haven't put an agenda item there. It's quite possible agenda items will make their way onto that agenda as the work proceeds in the year. It's always hard to know, for example, on your projects, when you're scoping them, exactly what meeting you'll be at, so things do shift here and there. We're just starting a couple projects, including a large project, which is our housing needs and capacity analysis, and that will set the framework for work on a housing production strategy next year. So we'll be talking a lot about housing. I feel like that's been a theme for 5 years now, at least. And we'll continue, exactly. So at this point, I wouldn't say, make plans on that day, if you could still reserve your planning commission date. But as we get closer, if agenda items don't pop on, we are happy to cancel meetings, particularly during the holiday season, and give you guys a night off. So I think we did that this last year.
Yeah.
We managed to adopt a whole bunch of stuff in October and November, and then
while I was on leave,
let you go free. That's right.
Plan your red-eye flight for December 13th.
That's right. We should know, typically we know a month in advance if we don't see anything coming, and so we are able to give you that heads up.
If you've been good or if you've been bad.
No comment. Okay, I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. We're adjourned 7:50 p.m. Thank you, everybody.